I'm going to run up and get my charger just in case. மேலே ஹாலில் இருக்கலாம். I'm back. We go. Okay. o'clock, so it should start.
Yes. Vaishnavi?
Hello and welcome to this panel discussion, Opportunities for Museums, Relooking in the Time of Physical Distancing, that's hosted by the Piramal Museum of Art. I'm Vaishnavi Ramanathan, curator with the museum. We are doing this panel discussion on the occasion of International Museum Day. This event is the culmination of the celebration that we've been having for Museum Day for the last 1 week. We've been doing various walkthroughs and workshops such as the Mulund Gallery walkthrough and art appreciation workshop. And this event discusses and addresses one of the most pertinent issues that has been on the mind of many people dealing with museums and involved in museums. As we deal with the crisis, one of the things that we're asking ourselves is, what role can museums play at a time like this? And as museums, many museums depend on ticketing for the primary source of revenue. Many of them are left grappling with basic questions of sustenance. How can they make themselves relevant? How can they pay salaries and basic questions like that? And there is also a lot of uncertainty about what the post post-COVID world is going to look like, and whether the current museum model will be relevant anymore, or whether we should go for a different model of thinking about museums. So there are many questions that are there on our mind. But rather than get paralyzed by this current situation, what are the affirmative actions that we can take at this particular point? What are the different strategies that we can take, that we can think of in order to engage with our audiences better, and to also bring in better practices of in the field of museums itself. So there are many things that we can do, both for the museum and for the people that the museums are involved with. And in order to find out more about these things, we have a distinguished set of panelists here. We have Mansi Prasad from the Indian Music Experience in Bangalore. Welcome. We have Dr. Deborah Tyagarajan from Dakshin Chitra, Chennai. We have Malika Ahluwalia from the Indian Partition Museum in Amritsar, and Ashwin Rajagopalan from the Piramal Museum of Art and Ashwita, Chennai. So some words of introduction about our panelists. Mansi Prasad is the director of Indian Music Experience in Bangalore. She is a well-known Indian classical vocalist herself. She started performing concerts at the age of 9 and has since then been performing widely both in India and across the world. Mansi is the recipient of several awards in music, including the prestigious Bismillah Khan Yuva Puraskar from the Sangeet Natak Academy. Manasi is an engineering graduate and went on to do her MBA from IIM Bangalore. So welcome, ma'am. Next, we have Malika Ahluwalia, who's the CEO, curator, and co-founder of the world's first Partition Museum, which opened in Amritsar in 2017. It is a people's museum that houses one of the largest collection of partition memories in the form of objects, oral histories, and documents. It is a really fascinating museum. Malika has received many awards for her work, such as the Asian Indian Youth Achiever Award, and so on. Welcome. Then we have Dr. Deborah Tyagarajan, who's the founder director of Dakshin Chitra Heritage Museum in Chennai. The museum opened its door to the public in 1996. The museum focuses on art, architecture, and folk performing arts of South India. She's written many books and authored several articles on vernacular architecture, craft, museums, and museology. Welcome, ma'am. Then we have Ashwin Rajagopalan, who's the director of Piramal Art Foundation, which has a collection of modern and contemporary Indian art. Under his leadership, the museum has implemented several pioneering programs that deals with art residencies, archiving artist collections, and so on. And he's also a curator himself. Ashwin is the founder of Ashwita, an integrated retail, restaurant, art, and cultural space in Chennai. Welcome, Ashwin. So some basic things. The panel discussion will be for 45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. Any general responses that the audience might have can be sent in via the chat box. But if you have any specific questions, please type them in the Q&A section, and we will be addressing them right at the end. So let's begin with the event. One of the first questions that I would like to pose to all the panelists is, as we are all working remotely and we are adjusting to a new way of working, it has called for a lot of changes in the way we work and in the way we think and in the way we interact with our colleagues. So at this particular point, keeping in mind the way we are working and the future that might be there for the next 2 or 3 months, what are the areas that you would like to concentrate on? Whether it be in terms of knowledge building, engagement with audiences, or just bringing in practices to do with collection management and things like that. So what are the areas that you would like to concentrate on for the next 1 or 2 months? So can we begin with Mansi, please?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Vaishnavi, and thank you to the Piramal Museum for having put this panel together. And this is part of the larger Ghar Pe Museum initiative as well from the Artex company. So I'm grateful to all of you for having sort of brought us together, not physically, but at least virtually, especially because it's International Museums Day. I think it's indeed appropriate that museums like us get together, and we are all in this together. So for better or worse. So let's just share whatever we can with each other. As far as, dealing with this new world and this crisis goes, at the heart of it, I think the vision of our museum and the vision perhaps of every museum remains the same. From my perspective, why museums is, in my mind, three things, three I's. The purpose of museums is to inform. Secondly, it's to interpret. And thirdly, it's to inspire. And that core vision, I think, continues to remain the same. Now, whether we do that physically, whether we do that digitally, whether we do that through exhibits, whether we do that online through learning sessions, I think those are just various ways of reaching our end goal. In this new sort of world that we have all been thrown into, I like to take an analogy from the world of music that, in music, when you have this pause button, the pause is kind of a symbol of silence or taking a break, and where you can either go rewind to the past or fast forward to the future, and the choice is really ours. So at the IME, I'll speak for us, we've been trying and doing a few things during this period, and this is what we like to focus on. Number one, I think we play a vital role in the lives of our audiences. As people are grappling with their own new realities, there is a void in all our lives which used to be filled with art, culture, entertainment, whatever it may be. And people are looking for that void to be filled, and I think museums can play a very important role there. So I think our first responsibility is to really keep our engagement with audiences going. Secondly, I think all museums around the world have been talking about digital transformation, moving into the technology age. We at the IME have had a bit of an advantage because we've already been technology first. We are, highly technology driven at the museum, but we are sort of ramping up our online ways of engagement, including, of course, virtual exhibits, getting our staff and our volunteers to curate little mini snippets from the exhibits, put them online. So, of course, there's this knowledge building that's going on within our own staff and our community. Thirdly, I think it's a very good time for long-term focus as well. Be it in terms of ramping up our digital archive infrastructure, be it as I said, in terms of getting onto virtual museum platforms. I think the writing is on the wall that the future is going to be a combination of the physical and digital worlds. And it's a good time for us to ramp up our initiatives in that direction.
Ashwin, would you like to go next, please, as to what the museum's priorities might be for the next 1 or 2 months?
Sure. Thank you, Vaishnavi. We all started on this journey in mid-March, thinking of, what are we going to do? The end was nowhere in sight, and people are throwing up numbers as high as 2 years from now or 3 years from now, what we're going to do. So our initial focus was, yes, like how are we going to go digital? But I think the primary agenda, which at that point we didn't know how to contextualize it, was how are we going to stay connected with our audience? How are we going to provide that vital function of providing, I'm calling it entertainment, but what I mean is, providing that need for people to connect culturally, to feel, to get that didactic response from whatever it is that our museum or the objects in it are providing. So we started there, but I think now the good thing is we're also 2 months down into this lockdown, and also looking at some kind of light at the end of this tunnel. At least we know that we've hit certain hard realities. We, I think, have to live with certain things now. So I think our current focus is to just look at how are we holding up our vision, how are we improving the way we communicate, how are we going to continue to provide meaningful engagement. So, but also at the same time taking a pause. We're actually not running head on into trying to see how to go digital or how to be interactive. We're not even trying to figure out how to get people back into our space. We're just trying to figure out how to engage at the moment.
So it seems that this seems to be a period of reflection from what both Mansi and Ashwin have said, and also a period to commit ourselves to engaging with our audiences in newer ways. So let's find out from Dr. Deborah what her perspectives are on this.
One of the things that it says I'm muted now, okay. Thanks, Vaishnavi. One of the things we're trying to do is to get our staff to, as you said, reflect. I think they've been doing a good job at working on new different programs, which they can launch online and then follow up at the museum itself. But to get the staff to work as a team when they're all in different places, and to keep them inspired so that they feel that, golly, you know, there will be an end in sight and everybody will be coming back. And I think it's a time when we can look at different ways of connecting more deeply with the communities we serve. And if you can inspire them digitally and then bring them in when the museum opens. We have an advantage because we're an open air museum, and we already have certain queries for events that people want to have with less than 50 people at the center. But digital, I think, is only part of what we can do. We really need to bring people into the museum. So for these next 2 months, one of the things we're doing is looking at our finance, because we're totally self-sustaining. And then how and where do we go for finance if this continues for a long time? Because we have a staff of 66. So do we, as a museum, do we qualify as an MSME for special loans if we would need to take them out? I think museums have to look at different ways in which basically the society should come forward to support them. So finance is a major thing that we have to look at now also. Okay.
Yes, I think finance is really one of the key things that all museums have to look at. Ms. Malika, would you have anything to say here on how the Partition Museum is dealing with the current situation?
Sure, I think a lot of great points already made by my fellow panelists. I think the way we're thinking about it is really 3 phases. In the near term, in the immediate term, obviously the museum is closed. We closed down even before the national lockdown, so we've been closed for a bit over 2 months now. And in that phase, as everyone has said, really the question is, how do you engage with your audiences? So a lot of things that we did offline, for us, engaging with the youth, engaging with students is particularly important. So that's one thing we started thinking about quite early, is how do we create online activities where students would come to the museum before? How do we create those through our social media or through targeted outreach to schools? I think one thing that's been quite a positive side effect of that is that I think in the past, our imagination had been a bit limited by the geographies we were in. So we targeted mainly Amritsar school kids and school kids around Amritsar who could come physically to the museum, or students in Delhi because our head office is here. And I think just the fact that we're locked down now, you know, we can think about targeting school children anywhere in the world, really. And I think in that sense, that's been a positive side effect of this in terms of opening up our imagination. Even in terms of, you know, just as we speak just now, my team is hosting an open mic on poetry from the Partition. And, you know, the poets who are speaking are again from all over India and the world. I mean, we have a poet from Italy, we have a poet from Chennai, we have a poet from Bhatinda. So again, I think had this not happened, we would have probably done an event with local poets in a physical place. And so I think that's been kind of something that's opened our view in terms of how the audiences we can engage with. So that's the immediate term. The midterm, we're already starting to think about, okay, if the museum does open sometime in June, how do we safely get audiences into our space? We used to have quite a high footfall. Of course, we do expect tourism to drop sharply. But still, I mean, rules around, okay, everyone's going to have to wear a mask. How do we place sanitizer stations? How do we ensure that our staff ensures people are social distancing? Do we have some kind of rules around how many people we let in per hour? So those kinds of, that's the midterm, while the virus is still out there, while it's active, but we do open our physical space. And in the long term, we're really hoping that we approach something closer to normalcy. We are a physical museum. That's the heart of who we are. As Ashwin said, I don't really envision us shifting from that. The reason we set up the Partition Museum was we felt that there is power in physical spaces, and we are kind of, as with many of the museums here, very multimedia, very immersive, very experiential. And you come into a gallery, you've got a soundscape, you've got installation, you've got oral histories, I think that's very hard to recreate online. So for us, we do want to do digital activities in the near term, but I don't see that as a shift in terms of the heart of who we are going forward, which is that once the virus is kind of more controlled, we do hope to bring people back into the physical space. And so to your point, Vaishnavi, we are working on initiatives also using this pause time to work on initiatives that would be used in the mid to long term when people are in the physical space. We've been working on our audio guide. That was something we hadn't had time to do before. And we feel like now it's going to be a much more of a necessity, because we won't be able to do group tours the way we did earlier. And so now people will need to take audio tours. We've been working on some of the translations of our entire content into more languages to make the museum more accessible. So things that we can do online, content management, the team's been working on, as Mansi said, kind of new exhibitions, new ideas. So really been trying to think about all the things we can do remotely, but both with a view of the immediate term, what do we do digitally, but also with the view of the longer term of making the museum kind of more welcoming when our visitors hopefully come back.
Thank you. You've given some great insights. So one thing seems to be this turn towards the digital. All museums are trying to engage with audiences through the digital platform, bringing their collections online and things like that. But on the other hand, there is also this physicality of the art object that is there in the heart of museums. And museums are trying to balance how to create the same level of engagement that is there when you're in front of a physical object. And Mansi brought up this point of a digital plus a physical combination exhibition. Do you have any points to add to that, or are there any reactions to that? You're muted.
Okay. Vaishnavi, one of the things I think we have to look at is, we have diverse audiences, and we do a lot with corporations, schools, we do a lot with villages. And so digital is not going to help there. So maybe one of the things we have to look at is much more outreach, particularly at the times when the museum is closed. We can go into communities, we can work on traveling exhibitions where we bring our knowledge into the schools and into the community. I know that CSMVS museum has a bus. They're getting now 2 buses which they take around. And so maybe we have to look at how do we engage more equally, do the digital and do the outreach at the same time.
Yeah, I was muted, and I completely agree with Dr. Deborah that, we need to find new ways to look at the museum beyond the museum. Yes, I agree with Malika when she says, and just like her space, our space is extremely experiential. It is about the object, but it is so much more about the visitor experience. And creating that visitor experience in sort of a 16-inch laptop at best, or like, an 8-inch mobile screen. That's what people are experiencing the digital world. Let's be honest, okay? It's not the same, and it's never going to be for a long time. Okay, we'll get to VR headsets and things like that perhaps, but we're still looking at that being a while away. And there is something about a physical space that, we are museums because we believe in that, the transformative power of a physical experience. Having said that, I think this time has taught us that, the world doesn't function as per our visions. We have to find ways to adjust to what the world throws at us. So few things that, I would say. One, I think core to this is our staff, and the fact that I look at each of our staff as being mini entrepreneurs. They need to be agile. They need to be able to adjust to different roles. You know, we have an entire museum operations team which doesn't have a museum to operate as of now. But is there a way that perhaps the knowledge that they've got by just walking around the museum, for 12 to 16 hours a day, they've absorbed all this knowledge? Is there a way that, you know, that can be sort of delivered online? So, you know, as I said, some of the things that we've been focusing on, for example, we're doing an online music quiz. So, knowledge for that is being sourced from everybody, from volunteers, from staff, from wherever possible. We're doing a summer camp right now as we speak, an online summer camp, and one of our program executives is running that camp around songs and stories from around the world. So we've all got to find ways to really quickly shift from one role to another. And that's really, I think, the only way that we can navigate these unprecedented times. So I would agree that we are not looking to actively, put out purely, digital experiences. I think it can only be a sort of hybrid or a support to what exists physically. For example, just today we've released a walkthrough of the Pandit Ravi Shankar exhibition that we had. We opened the exhibition on March 7th and it closed on the 14th of March. So yes, we've done a whole virtual walkthrough and it's out there for people to see. But it's certainly, I do hope that people will come back and experience the exhibit in its physical reality. And yeah, so I think it's only going to be a combination or a support to the physical space that we already have.
Just like to add to that, Vaishnavi. So I think, we were also looking at this idea of how tactile we can be, right? Because whatever the digital is going to facilitate, it actually is far less inclusive. For a while, I mean, museums, are talking about inclusivity, and then suddenly you go digital and there is no inclusivity there, purely because the digital medium itself, high-speed internet, good connections is not is not like your basic availability, right? It still is a luxury. And for people to, if you're saying, okay, what about the older population? What about, as you said, all the people we reach out to, like your BMC schools and, people who we know earlier had no access, and we said we'll take things to them. What happens to them? And more than that, I mean, your visually impaired people, your, everything, from your physically challenged audience, this is not inclusive at all. So it's actually kind of reduces, while we think it reaches to more people, it's also excluding a lot more people. So we've been thinking actively on what to do about that. But again, as I said, it's also overridden by the idea that we're going to be patient. So yeah, so.
Yes, I think the digital brings up a lot of issues with relation to access, because on one hand, it enables us to reach a very global audience, but even within the country, if you look at it, many people don't have access to the internet. It's not just the question of audiences, but even museums perhaps, because there are museums that operate out of rural locations where access to the internet is very, very hard to come by. And one more point that I would like to raise is with regard to museum staff even. So there are various levels of digital literacy that are there among people. And as we are quickly thrown into this situation and are forced to deal with a new way of working, many people are unable to suddenly transition to this new role and unable to pick up the digital skills that are necessary for this transition. So how do we circumvent this problem? What are the other skills that we can equip our staff with at this particular point in order to work more efficiently in the future or to tide over the current crisis? So anybody can react to this.
I think we need to have some training programs with people who can show them how they can easily put things on the web or put things on whether it's Photoshop or whatever they're doing, to give them the confidence that they can actually create something which is good for the digital medium. I think that, we always work as a team, so we always brainstorm together, and I think that helps, because then every staff member feels they can go to a more tech-savvy staff member. But we still have to upgrade all our skills.
I think, for us also that has been a concern. A lot of our staff members don't have laptops, and the way the lockdown was enforced, and Punjab was actually under curfew, so there was very little time for them to even reach the office to pick up material, etc. But I think, as Deborah said, if you talk to the team, oftentimes you can come up with ideas. I mean, we kind of the first 2 weeks we were just like, okay, everyone just take a holiday. But then, like in April, we were like, this is not sustainable. We made a commitment that we wanted to keep paying all our staff their entire salary. And doing that, one feels a responsibility towards the trust also, that, as a trustee, I have a fiduciary responsibility towards the trust. I want to make sure work is happening, and especially in a scenario where we don't know how long the lockdown will be continuing. So we just got imaginative, like I think things that we thought could only be done on a laptop by English speaking people were done on a phone in Punjabi script. And then so one team member is working on that, another team member is translating it into English. It's definitely not the most efficient way to approach it, but I think it enabled our entire team to feel they were involved. It enabled us to think of new things that had been left off, things that needed to be done, but nobody had the bandwidth to do before. I think this gave us time for those team members also to step up and get involved in things that were way beyond their normal scope of work. So I think it's also created that opportunity for us. We have people in the operations team who are looking at creating material in Punjabi for local school engagement, like things like that I think is necessary in this time, from both the perspective of ensuring your team stays connected, stays inspired, but also ensuring that the work of the museum can be furthered and grow in ways that we hadn't thought of before.
I think one of the things that you say, Malika, language is very key, because we're all English speaking museums with a population with 2 or 3% English speakers. So how do we engage much more with the local community and local languages, and make sure that all our graphics and everything we do is, if it's in English, it should be in the local language at the same time.
Yeah, our museum is completely in Punjabi and English, but you're right in terms of everything we do on social media and stuff like that is largely in English.
Mansi, do you have any reaction to that? I saw you unmuting yourself, so.
I just had the exact same thing to say as Malika, which is, we are a bilingual museum, but if you see a large amount of content that we put out on social media is overwhelmingly or mostly in English. And I think this is a time for us to think about that, because of course the theme for this year's Museums Day is about diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a time for all of us to introspect and ask ourselves really how inclusive are we being, perhaps at the museum we are, because just to give you an example, at the IME, even while we were in the planning stage 10 years ago, we wanted to make sure there was wheelchair access, even though ADA norms in India are still developing. But these are things I think, I'm sure most of us here share, that we've tried as far as possible to make our spaces physically inclusive in terms of, as I said, language or accessibility. But this is a good time for us to make sure that that same vision gets reflected online as well. At the end of the day, we are also building a brand of the museum online. And do we want to be seen as only, catering to English speaking, digital friendly, communities? You're right. What do we do about senior citizens who may have access but limited comfort with technology? What do we do for people who can only access content in other languages, rural areas? So I think it's a time for introspection. I'm not sure anybody here has answers yet, but it's a good time to pause and reflect on these questions.
Yes, I think the issue of the vernacular or engagement in local languages is really very important, because there is a whole other audience that we are completely not aware of or not engaging with, simply because everything that we do is mediated through in English. But one point that I wanted to bring up here is the issue of diversity within staff. Like, for example, a person who probably deals with collections may be interested in graphic design, for example, and may be very talented in it. and may not have had the opportunity to explore it. Or another person within in the museum may be interested in, say, for example, curation. So how do you develop these talents that are there within your staff, which have for a long time remained unexplored? Is this a good time to do that as well? A kind of exploration of talents that are there beyond each person's well-defined area of work. So is that something that your museums are doing?
I think, Vaishnavi, we do it in Dakshin Chitra because we work so much as a team. Those people who have extra talents in different areas, we don't hem them in just to where they are. But we find for a lot of our staff who should be reading, we have such a wonderful library, a lot of staff don't want to read. And that I find very upsetting, because how do you grow as a museum if your staff is not growing in knowledge also? Having said that, we have very good staff who read and are knowledgeable also. But it's, one has to work with, as you said, different types of staff with different skills and different interests.
So I think most of us here are perhaps similar in the sense that if I may make a generalization, being sort of non-government museums, we typically run with very lean organizations. I have a staff of 10, which is apart from, outsourced, security and housekeeping. So by the very nature of the way our organizations are structured, our people have to be very agile. If we are heading towards an event, everybody in my team becomes an event manager of some sort. If you're heading towards an exhibition, everybody is there putting things in place. So I think by the nature of the way our organizations are structured, maybe there is a sort of entrepreneurial mindset that is built into some of the people. I can't generalize for everybody. And my firm belief is, sometimes throw them in at the deep end, and people rise to the occasion in ways that you would not expect. You just, tell them, there's this Zoom to Facebook thing live that you can do, just figure it out and come back to me. And people may not have done it before, but just provide the opportunity and say, figure it out and come to me if, and I think this boils down to maybe just regular management rather than something specific to museums. But I think the one thing that connects people who work in museums, I believe, is that we all work in this out of passion. We are here not so much only for a paycheck, but because we are passionate about the work we do. And I feel that passion drives many of our teams to find solutions in unexpected ways.
Yes, you don't come to work for a museum to make money. So you have to have a passion.
I mean, I agree with Mansi where, the thing is, we are also a corporate backed museum, right? So all our performance is measured in those metrics. I mean, end of the day, it's our corporate HR that takes care of our staff. It's our, corporate budgets that we have to present and so on. So yes, I agree. Agility at this point is very important. And our team has actually been put through that, because constantly also, I don't know, maybe it's a Bombay thing as well. Everybody who's in that city wants to become a curator or wants to end up taking on these, I'm not going to say larger roles, but at least high knowledge quotient roles, right? So they want to come in there and have a say in the curation. So we took this as an opportunity. We said, okay, great, sure, all of you can be curators. So we started a writing program, which we said, okay, every week, 300 words. No saying I have work, I have to take care of my house, nothing. So this is a fairly strict writing program. But the outcome of it, I mean, we didn't say what to write on, but at least the outcome of which has been very interesting. So we're now bringing out, there's 11 people writing, so 11 pieces of writing every week. And in this lockdown, we might have 100 pieces of writing when we're done with it. And suddenly everybody is seeing, oh, okay, we should write. We have a voice, we have perspectives. And then now it gives at least me the position to say, sure, now write some more or do some more, So in a sense, it is giving them focus and kind of like a literally homework, but enabling them to find their voice, find their own language, find their own talent. So, or rather allowing them to also experience what it takes to have a voice and say things and be a curator, and the responsibilities that go into every word you write or the ideas that you come up with. So we're doing things like that. We also just very recently found out that one of our office assistants, or rather he helps us with all the maintenance of artworks and stuff, has been writing long passages in Marathi and putting it up on his WhatsApp. So now he's part of the writing program as well. So yeah, this is what we're doing.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one sentence to that, which is it extends, at least in our case, I'm sure some of you, beyond our staff to our volunteers as well. So they've been, in fact, doing quite a few of the virtual walkthroughs that we've been doing through this week. They've started writing out these mini exhibits online. So there's a way to extend this knowledge building beyond our core staff to our volunteers as well.
I think this lockdown has been a good time for many of us, even working in museums, to discover our other interests and to channelize our creativity. And some of it has also been very therapeutic, like, for example, a writing program, and discovering that you have some talent or interest in writing can help you put out what you're feeling at this particular point, as we are going through so many emotions. One point that I would like to raise here is, what do you think is the role that your museum can play in this particular point and in the next few months to come, as there is a lot of uncertainty, in helping people overcome this sort of emotional upheaval that they're going through? So is it something that all of you are thinking about?
I think they need to know that you're going to pay their salaries. I think that's very important. And as Anasi said, and Malika said, we've taken on the responsibility to pay the salaries no matter what. So even if we have to borrow money, we will do so. But if the lockdown continues for 12 months, or we don't have visitors, then it'll be very difficult for all of us, I think. I think writing, I think what Ashwin said is a wonderful idea.
And I agree with that, that while at the present time we're all digging into our reserves, the $1,000,000 question that everybody has on their minds is revenue. And at the end of the day, being in some sense museums that don't have perhaps completely guaranteed sources of funding coming in, where we have to work for every rupee that comes into our coffers, certainly everybody in the museum/cultural institution space has this big sword hanging over our heads as to how long can we continue to sustain. We have, of course, a responsibility towards our staff. We have a responsibility towards the objects that we are safeguarding, because, irrespective of our doors being shut, we still need to maintain temperature, humidity, conservation, protecting these priceless objects that all of us have in our exhibits and in our stores. So, and as much as we'd like to engage with audiences online, my observation has been that revenue generation online at a time like this is very difficult. Firstly, our audiences themselves have been faced with dwindling revenue prospects, and the share of pocket that they would devote towards art and culture would definitely correspondingly be less. Sponsorship, donations, everything is right now, kind of a no-no. So the one area that we have seen limited success with is in learning initiatives. And that's where I think, we should focus our efforts. For example, our learning center, which was a neighborhood music class, has completely moved online. So 150 students are now learning music digitally, and they didn't skip a beat. It happened again, of course, because all our audiences were urban and they had access to the internet. So I think the real challenge for all of us, whether we like it or not, as much as we'd like to add value to our audiences and take care of our staff, is where is that money coming from over the medium term that will help us sustain? And I think that's where we need to, as leaders in the museum space, be focusing our thoughts and our efforts in.
Malika, do you have any thoughts on this, on how museums can sustain themselves on tiding over this crisis in terms of finances?
I think the previous speakers have covered it. I mean, I think it's just a time for me, as I think about the next few months, it's a time for hunkering down and focusing on your core. Like, I participated in another discussion the other day on this, where some people were saying, we should invest in technology to take the objects and put them online. And I said, you know what, I don't have money for that. Like, I'm focusing on how do I pay my staff? How do we make sure when the museum reopens, we have the core of what we do? So things like audio guides, translations, and the core, educational activities and the core, those are what I'm going to make sure that I can do. But the reality is that CSR donations are going to crash over the next year. What's interesting is in this panel, it's largely private museums, community museums, right? So I don't know if the others receive government funding, we don't. So really, if CSR donations are crashing and your high net worth individuals are worried about what's happening to their personal wealth, and your ticketing revenues are falling because tourism is falling, people are worried about going into shared spaces, then really this is the time when I think all of us have to be conservative about what is at the core of what we do as an institution, what is our mission as an institution, and how do we make sure we keep doing those things, right? Like for us, it would be unimaginable to say we won't engage with schools, we won't engage with young people, we won't continue to record oral histories, to archive objects, because we know, okay, we have a limited time window, right? We have maybe 5 years in which to engage with this population and build our collection. And so those kinds of things I know I will have to budget for. I know I want to keep my team together. I know I have to pay for that. I know I have to pay for collection management, etc. But this is not the time that, unfortunately, as great as it would be to use the lockdown, to use the slower time to say, how do we do more renovation of the museum, or how do we build, you know, some super tech product thing? It's a balance that I think everyone on this call would be trying to make of saying, what is our core, and how do we make sure in a scenario where we don't know how long the lockdown is going to last, and even when the lockdown lifts, how long the tourism / footfall slowdown is going to last? Because in my view, it's definitely all of 2020, and it's a good part of 2021 before we start going back to the kinds of numbers we had before.
I think there's some great perspectives there. There seems to be this fine line that all museums have to walk between their commitment to their staff, paying their salaries, and on the other hand, keeping the museum as an institution going and looking at the running costs of the museum. So there's a lot of thinking through that has to be done there. One point that I want to raise regarding the digital is, at this point, we see a lot of engagement in the digital world. Like, you run a panel discussion or a workshop, a lot of people are ready to attend it. But after the lockdown, do you envision this kind of engagement to be there? If not, how do you think this level of engagement with audiences through the medium of digital, which has a wide reach, to continue? Do you have any thoughts?
Can I start with that? So we have been thinking about this, because if you look at the numbers that we've been seeing of audience engaging with us, earlier in the month, we used to get 100, 150 people attending any webinar, right? When webinars were just starting. I've been on some which had 400, 500 people. You could not pay very good money to get 500 people to attend an event physically at your space, right? Our success metrics was 25 people have attended a talk, physically in Bombay, in Lower Parel, for an event. So I think there definitely is scope to look at audience this way, to look at engagement, to look at building numbers. But again, that said, I think people are a lot freer right now. I think that the number of people who I never thought would be on Instagram have, joined Instagram. The number of people who are getting onto this, because there's nothing else to do, right? Surprisingly, people have had time, like to structure time now. In fact, I think more people, the 6 o'clock webinars or this, it's become like a schedule, and people are participating. But I'm not very sure. I really am not very sure. Once everybody gets busy, it's going to go back to that scenario. But perhaps if somebody can come up with better quality. Now this is great. 5 of us are here talking. There's 30 people listening. But maybe if there's a way to increase the quality of these engagements and keep showing something new, right? Like the first 3 weeks of the lockdown was all about playing bingo on Instagram. So we need to find the next trend, right?
See, for us, we are in the domain of music, and it lends itself, of course, to a lot of public programs by the very nature of what we do. And frankly, before this, our social media and online engagement was just confined to providing information about what happened in the physical space or what is going to happen in the physical space. We never really looked at doing public programs completely online. And I don't know about the rest of my team, but it's opened my eyes completely to the fact that there are people who wake up early morning in Finland so that they can tune into our program, which is happening in the afternoon or whatever the case may be. It's expanded our audiences, certainly in terms of the geographical spread. Perhaps also in terms of, in a city like Bangalore, a lot of the people who would attend our public programs were people from the neighborhood, because Bangalore's traffic is just, maddening, right? Nobody would come from North Bangalore, however desperate they were to attend. So I really believe that going forward, I would like to keep the engagement online going. Of course, it will be supported by physical programs. Perhaps you can have, sort of complementary things, some part of which is happening online, something which is happening, because you don't want to cannibalize your own audiences who come to the physical space and now they can put their feet up and watch it at home. You don't want that to happen. But certainly, I think all of us should keep online engagement going even after the lockdown is over. There certainly will be audiences who want to tune in. I mean, the numbers are unimaginable. We do a session called Up Close and Unplugged, where we invite artists to do a chat with us and play. And for the last session, we had like 7,000 views in a matter of course, now how much of that is real engaged views? You can get into that debate, but there's no debating the immense reach that online can bring to all of us.
One thing I find also that in Madras, we don't get a lot of the wonderful speakers that come to Bombay and come to Delhi. And I've always worried, if I bring somebody down and I pay so much money and I only have 25 people listening, I'll feel so embarrassed. But if I can get a speaker online, people that normally won't come to Madras, then not only the Madras audience, but as you said, it's an international audience that can watch. It might take time to build up, but it is certainly an opportunity to bring in another dimension to the knowledge part of the museum.
Yes, I think there's a high level of engagement right now, especially because time seems to have dissolved. Like all of us are working across time zones, ready to tune into webinars happening in different parts of the world. So at this point, a lot of things seem possible, but how it is going to be following when the lockdown is lifted is a question. But it will be good to continue this kind of digital engagement with people from different parts of the world whom we would previously not have access to. So one important point that's repeatedly coming up is the idea of education. Like I think all the museums that are present here are very conscious of education as an important aspect of their mission. So do you think this is a good time for us to work on the idea of art education? Because considering the state of art education in our country, the curriculum that is there and the lacks that exist, do you think it's important for us to address that at this point? And what are your museums thinking of in this line?
Just teaching a child how to look, how to see an object, what an object tells you. That's something one can do online, and one can do better, of course, if you're right there with the object itself. I think it's very necessary to do more with art education for kids, definitely. And I think a museum has a wonderful advantage for that, because we have the objects and the staff right there. And then we always also have the children. So, but how we can relate that to school curriculum, that we'd have to see. We have every month, we teach 30 corporation school teachers how to teach about heritage. That's a collaboration we have with the corporation, and we don't charge, it's all free. So we could perhaps extend that also to art and how you look at art in the curriculum. But most schools, once you get to 8th standard and above, art is the first thing that goes. You won't find art in any curriculum 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade.
Yes, there seems to be a huge gap in our art curriculum, and museums have the potential to fill in that space. before we break for questions, I have one last question that I would like to pose to all the panelists, and that is, what would be your learnings from the current situation for your museum? What is it that this lockdown has taught you in terms of what you can do for your museum?
Stratus said, you can never rest assured that things will continue as they are because crises might be around the corner, and you have to prepare for them. So how to prepare for them, that's something we have to think about. So we make our budgets saying, okay, you know, we're going to have 15% more visitors this year and so much more income. And I think one has to have maybe a plan B besides your plan A, your optimistic plan A. Okay, what happens if you need a plan B? We're working on our plan B.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So if I were to say the top 3 things that come to my mind during this period, one would be never lose sight of what your vision is. And the way you achieve it might change, but your vision should not be compromised during a time like this. Number 2, constantly innovate, be ready to be agile, think out of the box, find different ways. I know it sounds like these motherhood statements, but it has held true for what all of us have been through. We've been through the ringer and we continue to be. So just, you know, try out new things. You know, what's the worst that can happen? Yeah, you fail, but this is the time where you can probably try out, you know, innovate and try something new. And number 3 is, you know, hope for the best, but expect the worst.
That's correct. I think this crisis is teaching us the importance of planning and having a plan B for everything. So Ashwin, what would be your thoughts on this?
For the first time in my life, I'm actually not doing something. So I've actually learned to sit quietly and contemplate or think. Actually, it's very interesting that that's how I'm responding to this. On a normal day, I'm always jumping there. I'm like, how did this guy do this before us? So that museum did something else. So, you know, you're always competitive. Right now, I'm actually enjoying this. I mean, besides making sure that the whole team still has their job and is getting paid, our funding is different, right? I mean, we don't depend on CSR, and we're literally depend on one human being to pay everything. But you know, besides that, I think being quiet has become a very interesting preoccupation at this time. Trying to keep the rest of the team quiet and wondering why I'm being quiet is a bigger challenge. But this is how I think I'm reacting at the moment. I'm just waiting for all this information to flow.
Yeah, I think all of us are kind of reflecting and thinking through what's going on and what our vision for the future is, what we want to do with ourselves and with the institutions we work for. So Malika, your thoughts, please.
I think a lot of points have been covered. I just add one in terms of, you know, a lot of what companies and NGOs around are thinking about the fact that a lot more things can be done work from home than otherwise thought of. And that not only when we're thinking of plan Bs, not as only is it financial, but also now, like I've just told the team, you know, even if the lockdown's lifting, just have 2 months of work with you at home, right? Like if at any point, either for necessity or for want, you're not, you know, you don't need to / want to be in office. So I think that those kinds of flexibilities, which you see in every organization now, also kind of coming through more here. I used to be a stickler for kind of everyone needs to work together and we brainstorm better that way, and, you know, we're a small team. So, but I think being kind of, it's opening up our imagination in that sense, and also saying let's be more prepared because this we don't know how the virus is going to look like in the next 3-4 months, right? So even if we're now lifting and we lift a bit more, there could be a clampdown again. So being prepared in more ways than one. And I say the second is what we discussed earlier, just in terms of the team and the different ways different people in the team can engage on different things, right? So I think also opening up our imagination on that front, as opposed to, I mean, you know, our team and head office is also very small, but I'm saying more for the ops team, the field teams, also thinking more broadly about the ways that they can engage.
Yeah, I think this lockdown is teaching us new ways of working, rethinking how we can work better also. And there are a lot of points that I would like to bring up, but audience has many questions, so we'll take the Q&A now.
Hi Vaishnavi. So the one question that audiences are asking are related to art education and the museum education programs that were there earlier. So what are the museums planning right now about coming back to schools? Like how do they engage with the huge audience that used to be the school going children? So there are a couple of people who've asked that question. How are museums engaging with school audiences now?
Anybody can just, yeah.
Well, I would say that that's quite a difficult question. We are holding a sort of discussions with some of the principals and telling them, okay, we have you know all the equipment for testing fever, respiration, pulse, all of that for everybody who comes in, and as I think Malika said, also the sterilizers and masks and social distancing. So when you do social distancing, you can't bring in 100 kids at a time. And normally when schools come, they'll come with 100 to 200 children, no matter what you tell them. I mean, we have a whole lot of programs for smaller groups, but I think we're going to have to see that we've always asked for registrations, but schools come without registration sometimes. And they say, oh, you're so far away, how can you turn us back? But we'll be very strict and have a lot more communication with each of the schools so that when they come, they will know, if we have to divide them into 3 separate groups, we have to, we will work with the principals to say, look, we can take 100 kids and 35 in each group, and this is how we're going to do it so that they don't have to be so close together. It'll also depend how the schools are working. How are they working with their kids together also? Because they have a lot of problems to face too. If you're in a classroom with 30 kids and you only have a confined space, how are they doing it? So they may be we have an open air museum, so they may be quite happy when they come to our museum that the chance of infection is less. It is a problem. It's going to be particularly a problem for a closed-in museum.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that as I mentioned before the lockdown, we had a pretty involved government school outreach program in and around Amritsar, where we were getting kind of hundreds of school kids coming every week. And obviously that stopped with the museum closing, and we don't know when it'll open again. I think the challenge with that going forward is not only what Deborah said, but in addition to that, schools are going to have a shorter school year and a bigger curriculum, and not a bigger curriculum, but the same curriculum to cover in that short amount of time. So we might see even a reluctance to spare that day or half day to come to the museum and engage with that. So I think that's going to be an immediate effect that we'll see, where curricular learning, which has always taken the front seat, is going to be in a bit more competition with arts education, or in our case, kind of more historical education. So I think that's going to be a concern. What we're doing in the immediate term is we are doing, as I mentioned earlier, taking some of our education program activities online. So we've been doing webinars with some schools. We've done online activities downloadable from our social media pages to engage kids. All of that has the access concern, like whereas before this crisis, most of our educational activity was focused on government schools. The social media online thing is more focused, obviously, towards people who have digital access. So we have simultaneously, the Amritsar team has taken it upon themselves to continue outreach to the government schools that they were in touch with, and they've created Punjabi content that they are disseminating through phones, through the teacher network that they've built up before this crisis. So that is something we're trying to equalize, to say, how do we continue to make sure we're reaching kids from across that socioeconomic demographic. But I do think that even when schools do reopen, we will have a lower number of principals willing to take out that time for their kids to come to the museum.
I just want to amplify what Malika said. I agree. There is going to be no room for non-curriculum based learning in schools. Like even this year, if September and October becomes when schools open up again, they're going to squeeze out everything that is not, school curriculum, because exams have to be prepared for, and students don't have time. So we were thinking of how we're going to address this, because are we trying to educate, make impact in schools, or are we going to try and change the lives of children? Like, do we think that, our future is about the next 3-4 generations, or are they kids in uniforms from certain schools? So I think from our side, at least, we're going to be looking at how are we going to reach those children, if not through the school network, how are you going to get access? There's no answer to that. I think the schools were a easy way of gathering a group of children from certain areas or locations or demographics, but we have to think of that. I think that's where we're going to put effort into trying to see how to reach as many children individually, right? So that the vision to educate the future is there.
I would completely agree with what Ashwin says. Whether it's groups of children from a school or whether it's children individually, at the end of the day, these are the young people, the next generation. So we have already and continue to engage with children online. As I said, right now, we have the summer camp that's going on called Songs and Stories from Around the World, where we have, kids from all over. In fact, they're not even from Bangalore. They're from all over who've signed up to be part of this. The other thing is the educational material. So whenever we have an exhibit, we've been developing sort of activity sheets that go with the exhibit. Now, typically these activity sheets are designed that you see the exhibit and then use the activity sheet to engage more deeply with the exhibition, right? You see the sitar, you draw it, or name is parts, whatever the case may be. But we, of course, have to look at tweaking that educational material in a way that it can add value without necessarily being in the physical presence of the exhibit. So you can still continue to have education material that's available without necessarily being tied to the physical object. So, this is something that we'll have to think through as well.
Yeah, I think many museums are thinking about how to adapt the material they already have to the current situation, and they're coming up with very, very creative ways of doing it too. So, Sally, can we move on to the next question, please?
Yeah. So there's a student of museology who's saying, I've observed that in India, very few people are actually interested in visiting museums, including school children. Even on social media, Indian museums are lacking far behind than the foreign museums to attract more visitors. Do you think that Indian museums need to work more on their marketing strategies to include more groups of people and communities?
Well, I hope whoever asked this question, I hope you're following all of us on social media, because I think most of us here are quite active and have a very active presence on social media and look to engage with audiences. You're right, historically it may have been true, but I'm sure everybody agrees here that that's fast changing. And initiatives like this Ghar Pe Museum that we've been having over the past two days, where we brought museums from across the country together, I think are a great step forward. Certainly the scope for improvement, there's, I'm not saying that we've learned it all, but I think that's a fast changing fact, especially if I may say so for non-government museums, but even for some of the government museums as well.
I think she's probably thinking of the beautiful walkthroughs of different exhibitions that they have, and the histories of different artists that they have. We're not quite that professional. We don't have quite that professional equipment to do that. But as you said, we get it out there anyway. So.
Our email is info@partitionmuseum.org. Please feel free to send through your suggestions. I would love to have them.
To the audience members, please do take a look at the websites and the social media handles of all the museums that are part of this panel. There's some very, very interesting things going on. So please do take a look at it. Sally, can you go on to the next question, please?
Yes. So someone is mentioning about two issues regarding digital museums. The first issue is of connection and the other of using digital media. In the future, 5 years from now, digital connectivity and affordability is going to become more expensive. Compare this with, say, what it was 5 years ago and now. And the second thing they are asking is more and more people, not just in cities and English educated alone, like audiences who know English, but also people in villages. People are computer savvy, and the next generations are also going to use computers with much more ease. So, are we including those? In addition to that, AR and VR will become commonplace. Perhaps museums and artists also should train themselves for this new space. This is the question.
Yeah, so I think the person meant to say that digital costs will become lower over time. I think that that's what meshes with the rest of the thing. And yeah, we've all seen that. We've all seen the geo effect. A lot more people are on data. And I think it's to the conversation we were having earlier that perhaps English literacy fluency hasn't kept pace with data access. So I think we as museums do still have a ways to go in saying the content that we're disseminating through our websites, through our social media, through kind of other innovative tech outreach we might want to do, how do we make that as vernacular as we have done with the information that is physically in our museums? So I think, you know, that is something we definitely need to do as data outreach grows.
I think also that we have to be prepared to have a much further reach into the countryside, into small towns, and to think of what is the content that they would like to have and which would really help them to get exposure, because exposure is one of the key things for success as you get into the business world or whatever professional world.
And I think a lot of people have been talking about AR, VR. It's not going to penetrate as fast or as much as we think it's going to, right? Because it's phenomenally expensive. Like even I think the cheapest, you know, VR table or the AR setups that you can afford for museums run into the crores. It's not cheap. So I don't think in the long, I think the other question there was, should artists adapt themselves for this future? I don't think so. I think artists should keep painting and sculpting and do whatever they do. I think it's like asking, should I be a painter or a sculptor tomorrow, right? But sure, you can explore the medium, but I don't think that going digital means changing how art is being made. And yes, I think data is going to be available cheaper and cheaper as we go along. I mean, of course, we know, you know, the geo effect exists. We know that now Facebook is in it. We're all on Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook is the same guy anyway. So, you know, things are going to definitely become easier, but there is a pace of change that the museums are not used to, which is how do you be like TikTok? How do you be like, you know, there's something called Hello. You know, maybe there is a lesson for the museum world to figure out, right? The simplicity in that messaging. Press a button, record a video, it goes viral. So how do you press a button, learn about art, you know? So, yeah.
So Ashwin, you said that artists should continue to paint and sculpt like before rather than concentrate on the digital. But when you look at artists or perhaps a craftsman, I think accessing the digital also opens up a lot of opportunities for them. And because some of them don't know how to use it, they're also facing, they're not able to reach out to certain audiences. I'm sure Dr. Deborah, who works closely with craftspeople, will have a lot to say on that. So I think I see two different perspectives coming in here.
We've tried to work with our craftspeople now that they've gone back to their villages so that we can do online sales of their items, but they don't know how to send photographs. They send a dark card instead of a photograph of their family, which would have an emotional connect. But you know, we have to get them out of the crisis first to say, look, when you want to do something online and you want to put your products out there for people to buy it, it's a time when you can pull emotional strings. You know, it has to be done in a certain way. So I think we'll work with them, especially. They all say, but we have only low-grade phones. We don't have high-quality cameras on our phones. So how do we take good pictures? So, you know, these are all questions that people will have when you get out of the urban centers.
Yeah, I think too, just a couple of more points to the question. I mean, I think not in the near term, right? Not in this crisis moment, but definitely over the next 5-6 years as tech changes, we will see a few things happen. One, we will see, yes, a lot more digital art. Like you're already seeing that. You're seeing artists who are creating that as their specialty, right? So it's not that they were a sculptor and now they're creating, they're just people who are making some really innovative, beautiful digital art, and you'll see a lot more of that happening, things we probably don't know about today. And you'll also probably see more of an equalization of the playing field like you see in a lot of other areas, right? Like you get a lot of TikTok superstars coming from like some tier 3 town. This might create an opportunity for more artists in the same way to get noticed. And even if they can't afford to physically come and live in a big city, so you might see that as data gets more rural, gets more into the smaller towns, that more people, what the internet is supposed to do, open your imagination, open your mind, open your access. And so I think we'll see that a lot more in the art world. We'll probably see a lot more, we've already seen some museums that have chosen to be purely digital. You might see more of that, and that's going to create more opportunities for artists who want to be purely digital also. So I think definitely the data revolution is changing this field as it is changing every other.
I'll speak again because the domain we work in is in music, which has historically been extremely quick and fast in adopting to technology. Especially now, there are collaborations that are happening, between someone in a small town with someone else in a foreign country. I think it's very commonplace in the music world, and you've had, artists streaming, doing lives or recording videos and posting it from very remote parts of the country. So I think perhaps there's a leaf out of the book of musicians that a lot of institutions can take, because they've been very quick to adapting to collaborations of this sort. Again, it doesn't fundamentally change the nature of what they do. They're still at the end of the day making music, but it's manifested in different ways. For example, we are in the early stages of discussing an online residency. We had an international artist in residence program that we had planned for the later part of the year or early 2021. And we're already exploring scenarios that if international travel continues to be difficult, then, can we explore some parts of the residency online where you're still collaborating with local community here? You're maybe doing public programs, the artist sitting wherever he or she is in the world, engaging with our audiences. So at least I think it is a brave new world out there in some ways. And as data penetration increases, you're right, it may not happen today or tomorrow, but I think it's a future that we should all be actively looking at.
Your idea of the online music residency is most exciting, and we look forward to knowing more about it. But we have many, many questions coming in from the audience. So can we go to the next question, please?
So they want to know if museums and curators can add value to our audience, and how can these engagements add value?
How can what?
Curators and museums can engage with audiences. They want to support their initiatives. So how can people add value to this?
Do you want to answer?
So I think maybe they're trying to ask how, as an audience, they can add value to curators and to the museum. And I think that I'm going to first answer very specifically for my museum, and then maybe more generally. We are what we call a people's museum. And so we are built with objects donated by people, oral histories of ordinary families. And so to the extent that the person who asked this question can connect us, is from a partition family or can connect us to partition families, we're always welcome. We always welcome that, and we would love that. So I think, that's specific to our museum and a few other museums, but I do think increasingly a lot of museums are open to, and each will have their own accessioning policy. So you should look out for that. Like maybe some of the museums here might accept oral histories or objects if you have something like that. So that's one very specific way, I think. The others would be, spread the word. It's not a quote unquote exciting thing, but if you really feel passionate about museums, to the point made earlier, I think we all need support in creating that excitement, creating that buzz around the museums that do exist, that are doing innovative things. I think that the field needs also more, it needs a diversity of people. I think it needs a diversity of people with very different skill sets. So even like in our team, we have very few people who come from your very typical museology, museum background. I see Mansi nodding. So, I think bring some of that expertise into the field. If that's something you are excited about, I think that there is an opportunity to help broaden the thinking. So those would be some ways I'm sure my peers will add.
I think also for interpretation of objects, a lot of audience are donating objects now to us, and interpretations for exhibitions. I mean, when we set up the museum, we went to people in the community and said, what would you like to have shown about your community, in this house? And I think audiences can interact. It depends on the passion of the audience and the person and what they want to contribute, actually.
Yes, I think in recent times, there's a lot of interest from people to engage with museums, and I'm sure it will grow in the years to come. So can we go to the next question, please?
Yeah. So they're also asking, how can we focus on other audience groups like parents and families, and our museums also, if the vision is to reach out to children, isn't it a good idea to tap into rural children? Is that something that museums are looking into? Otherwise, museums should perhaps focus on parents, because currently the situation is lockdown, from one lockdown to the another. So how do we engage families on this digital platform? How is there a cost-effective way, cost-sensitive manner of doing this?
So I'll speak for the IME that, frankly, when the museum was open, we were looking at it in the reverse, which is, bring the kids in, and then they'll be so wowed by the place that they'll go home and tell their parents, look, this is where I want to go. So we were following the reverse strategy, which is, get the kids and they'll bring in their parents. You're right, now this is forced to rethink, because it's not going to be a child first. Anything digital, online, is the access point is through the parents. So you're right that we are looking at now the parents being the entry point to reaching the child. And having said that, I think all parents out there are fighting. I can speak, I'm the mother of 2 young children, and first of all, they didn't have school for a while, and now they're in summer vacation and they're stuck at home. They're kind of bored. They're looking for things to do. And me, as a parent, I'm actively searching online for ways to keep my child engaged. So I think that parents will naturally gravitate towards meaningful entertainment experiences of the kind that museums can provide, right? It's not like sticking a 2-hour animated film in your child's face just so that you can do your work. We're providing meaningful engagement, while at the same time hopefully being entertaining. So I do see that, there is sort of it's kind of like a win-win situation for both, where, we are trying to access the children, and, parents, of course, are interested in providing meaningful, educative yet entertaining experiences for their children. And the way we do it, of course, is through a wide variety of channels, be it parent groups on the usual WhatsApp, Facebook. There are so many online sites and publications that deal with, content for parents of children. So I think they're doing it by all the usual ways. And you're right, there is an opportunity to engage families as a whole. It would be great to get an entire family to engage with online content, because we've usually seen digital world as pulling people together, right? Everybody's in their own bubble, but maybe we can rethink that to bring people together to share an online experience together. It's a good point.
Well, for our museum, we market ourselves as a family museum, and we get probably about 8,000 or 9,000 children every year with their families, with their parents. We do different techniques to bring in families. And just one idea, we have all these different craft activities that anyone can do when they come to the center, which is a draw for kids. And they cost between 5 to 20 rupees. And we make a turnover of 15 lakhs a year just from these low-cost activities, which shows you that, you know, kids, and it's the kids with families who engage in those activities. So, and I agree with you, Manasi, that it's the children who bring in the parents. They come and they want their parents to come again. So they want to come again. So they bring it in. So, and as far as rural children go, we do a lot of programs with rural children, but with CSR money, because it's expensive. If we bring, we can go in, we've gone into the villages, but again, we've had grants to do it. If we bring rural children to the center, we have to provide the transport. They come with a teacher because you have to get permission from the Directorate of Education to bring in rural children. And we love doing it. We were doing for many years, Saturday and Sundays, full morning and afternoon with rural children, but it costs money. Unless we have CSR for it, we can't do it.
I think these activities are a very good way for kids and parents to learn about art and also to bond over it, I think. There are many opportunities there. We will take just one more question before we wrap up. So the last question, please.
Yeah. So instead of what we do, what can we do together? How can people across museums, across India form a connection, form a group perhaps to help each other?
Okay, there is an association of museums, and ICOM, the International Council of Museums, is getting established in India. To become a member of that, I think, is very important. But I think it is good to work, to be in contact with all the different museums, because we can also be a policy group. If we need any support from the Ministry of Culture, or we want to bring forth some particular plans to the government, then it helps if we're all there together. And I think that maybe is in the future, but I think it's something that we should be looking at. So how to connect? I think that is something we have to think about. And collaborations between museums, traveling museum exhibitions. I think there should be many more exhibitions that travel between museums in India. We haven't had that. And we had only one traveling exhibition, actually, which was quite successful. But I think these are ways we can collaborate together.
And whether it's this particular COVID crisis or not, I think forcing collaborations between museums in India particularly is very important. We've been advocating that for a while, because you know how it is. A lot of collections overlap, a lot of work gets, so you waste a lot of energy just in not having awareness of what other museums are doing. Sometimes you end up, every museum, at least that's looking at modern contemporary art, has a Hussain exhibition, a Raza show, a Ravi Verma. Like it's so repetitive, and you're actually wasting precious little resource. So I think collaborating, not just in terms of saying like, hey, can I use your space, or can I borrow something? I think collaborating to understand what other collections are, what other museums are doing, what is their plan for the next 12 months or 1 year, so that possibly where can you find these touch points, how can you integrate or interact with these other museums better. I think these kind of collaborations is something we're trying to explore, and I think would be a good way to make use of this resource and this time to collaborate.
For all the negative fallout that the COVID-19 crisis has had, I think one of the positives has been, in many ways, it's brought the community together, because of all these webinars and all these panels that either we've been part of or we've been attending. In many ways, we've perhaps broken out of our silos and come together in an unexpected way. Which would, we would have had to wait for some conference or some physical panel to have happened in the real world, which would have happened maybe once a year. But here's an opportunity for us to kind of meet maybe on a weekly or even more frequently as part of these various panels and webinars. Secondly, as much as I believe in formal associations and bodies, I think what's exciting is these informal networks and collaborations that we strike up where, you know, I can pick up the phone and ask Malika, you know, I had a conversation with the Heritage Transport Museum recently on how they're dealing with it. So, you know, there are all these different ways that we can form these connections. And certainly there are, you know, even within our group here, there are so many things we can do. Music and art have so many things in common, songs of separation and coming together. You know, there are so many, and of course, you know, artisans and the music of each community is there such a strong connect. So even within this little group here, there are so many opportunities for us to do things together. And I think perhaps, hopefully, this is the only the beginning of more such interactions happening.
Yes, indeed, collaborations really seems to be the key. And I think even going forward, we should continue to converse with each other and work with each other. So on this note, I think we'll have to wrap up the session because we are running short of time. Some of the important points that came up today in the discussion is the idea of inclusivity, and not just in terms of digital inclusivity, but also in terms of language, where we have vernacular languages being included in the discussion. And the other point is never losing sight of our vision. While the way we might execute our vision might change depending on the circumstances, we should never lose sight of it. And to have another plan of action, that is plan B, in place. And I think that is something most of us, whether it's in our professional life or in our personal life, do not have. And I think that's something we have to think about. And the other point is to be innovative and flexible in our museums and in the way we handle people in terms of roles. And the idea of collaboration, that is something very, very valuable for us going forward. And finally, the idea of education, how we can work with our audiences, what are the kind of tools we can use. And these are some of the points that came up in the discussion. So thank you to all the panelists for being here, Mansi Prasad, Malika, Ashwin, and also to Dr. Deborah Tyagarajan. I began my career with Dr. Deborah, so it is a great pleasure to connect with her again. And I would also like to thank all my colleagues who are working behind the scenes, Tejasvi, Sukanya, and everybody else, and Saili, of course, who are working behind the scenes to make this possible. Thank you, and please do follow us on Instagram and Facebook to know more about our exciting lineup of events. Thank you.
And on behalf of all the panelists, I just wanted to say thank you to Vaishnavi for having very nicely moderated this session. And thanks to the Piramal Museum for bringing us together, as well as, of course, Artix Company.
Yeah, thank you again. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.